Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sir Meerkat, and welcome back to the Moto Meerkat channel. So, Lewis Hamilton won his 7th world title at the Turkish Grand Prix. It seems that no driver can really keep up with Lewis Hamilton, but he does have one arch enemy, the tyres.
When are you going to call me in, man? These tyres are
I can't look after the tyres anymore, they're dead. I don't know if I'm going to keep them behind.
Now, these tyres that Lewis has on his car are nothing like the ones on your mate's Vauxhall Corsa, despite what he tries to tell you. Honestly, mate, I'm telling you, it's the best rubber that money can buy. Oh, sorry, mate, I just got to take this. Hello, love. Are you outside Mackey's, yeah? What toy did you get in your Happy Meal? But how do we manage to go from the slim tyres of early Formula racing to these absolute beasts of tyres that we have today? Well, I guess I'll tell you then. It seems that's probably why you clicked on the video. Let's get on with it. Dunlop were the main innovators in tyre technology in motor racing over the years. The pneumatic tyre was actually invented by John Boyd Dunlop in 1888, and it would be his tyres that won the very first Le Mans 24-hour race in 1923. These tyres were very, very crude by today's standards, beginning with the beaded edge design before creating the 5-stud design in 1934 as the first sort of competition-style tyre. This was then followed by the R1 design, and as I said, these tyres were pretty primitive, being made of cotton and genuine tree rubber that is naturally cultivated in South America from the rubber tree. There you go, who would have thought that? And this meant that each tyre weighed 18 kilograms. My God. When Formula 1 cars initially began racing in 1950, they did so on the R1 tyre design. This was before the R3 design that was introduced in 1955, soon to be followed by the R4 design in 1956. And then in 1958, the R5 design, who would have guessed that was coming up next? That was created with the largest breakthrough to date. The tyre used nylon fabric, reducing the weight by almost a whole 6 kilograms. That's quite a bit, and it introduced the first synthetic tread compound. This was around the same time that Goodyear and Firestone also entered Formula 1. I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, but Dunlop continued to dominate throughout that period, introducing the R6 design in 1962 and the R7 design in 1965. The first ever slick tyre was actually produced by Dunlop too. In 1966, they produced the CR70 tyre, but as they were relatively underdeveloped at the time, they proved to be unsuitable because, as we now know, a tyre needs flexibility to give it progression in the wear. But as the compound was too hard, the progression was never actually really reached, and the tyres would not create nearly as much grip as their grooved counterparts. And this left many drivers to say at the time that when they were driving on those slick tyres, they felt like they were driving lorry tyres, like they were so awful. And hence why the Dunlop slicks weren't ever used in racing. The CR82 tyre, created in 1968, was simply a development of their earlier CR65 treaded tyre, and the tyre race as such would begin to really hot up between Dunlop, Goodyear and Firestone in the late 60s, leading to the creation of tubeless tyres. The final tyre that Dunlop would create would be the CR84, introduced in late 1968, and it would be the tyres that Jackie Stewart would win his first World Drivers' Championship on in 1969. Even after that win with Jackie Stewart, Dunlop would pull out of Formula 1 after the season, just because they decided that the Formula 1, the way that the tyres were going, wasn't really in line with what they were trying to do with their road tyres. And obviously, when they started, the main thing was to be able to test these tyres on the race cars, so they have the best one to sell to the consumers on the customer market. But as the Formula 1 tyres were now getting so technical and starting to become more like slicks, weren't really working for road tyres, so they said, not worth the money for us, we're gone. They would, however, return to Formula 1 for 2 years in 1976 and 1977, supplying the tyres for 2 Japanese teams, Kojima Engineering in 1976 and the Maritsu Racing Team in 1977, both to very little success. Meaning that after 175 race starts in Formula 1, Dunlop tyres had achieved 83 wins and 9 Constructors' Championships. I can't can't lie, Engelbert aren't exactly a brand I've heard much about, if at all, to be honest. Their tyres were used in Formula 1 between 1950 and 1958. In their opening season, they only powered 2 of the 58 drivers that competed that season, and that was with the Equipe Gordini team of Robert Manson and Maurice Trintignant, with Maurice retiring in both races that he competed in, and Robert retiring in 4 out of the 5 that he competed in, but recording a 4th place in Monaco, so we'll take that as a win. But over the 8-year span they had in Formula 1, Engelbert would start 61 races, winning 8 of them, particularly dominating in 1956, winning 5 races, mainly thanks to the one and only Juan Manuel Fangio, helping him achieve the World Drivers' Championship for that year. Now, statistically, Continental were the most successful tyre supplier in Formula 1 history, winning 10 of their 13 races that they competed in across 3 seasons. And that was between 1954, 1955 and 1958. Now, they'd be the most successful under percentage-wise, but I don't know if it's really fair when you're comparing one company that's done 13 and other ones that have done like 300, but there we go, they can take the crown if they like. They particularly dominated in 1955, thanks to the Mercedes boys of Sir Stirling Moss and, you guessed it, Juan Manuel Fangio, winning 5 of the 7 races. Now, AVON tyres are actually very close to my heart, as I remember my dad racing in the AVON tyres Caterham Factory Championship when I was just a wee boy. But little did young Meerkat know that AVON tyres were actually used in Formula 1 in the 1950s and the 1980s. Between 1954 and 1959, they would win a total of 0 races. Not the best start, but when they returned for 1981, they come back with a bang, right? Not really. They left at the end of the 82 season again with no wins. So that would mean that from the 29 race starts that AVON did have, they won 0. That's a big oof. The competition at the time was simply too tough between the tyre manufacturers, and AVON just couldn't cut it. Firestone would enter the sport in 1950 and would continue until 1960, so they had 10 seasons in the sport, and a very weird statistic, they would only win 1 race every year. Literally every year, 1 race. How odd. Still better than AVON, to be fair. But it wasn't until their return to the sport from 1966 to 1975 where they would cause some commotion and bring the fight to Dunlop like no one had done before, being used by Cooper, Lotus and Honda in the late 60s and absolutely dominating in 1970 thanks to their use by the top 3 teams, Lotus, Ferrari and March. And at the 1971 Spanish Grand Prix, Firestone would introduce the first slick tyres to actually be used in race conditions, which then quickly became the standard for most of the suppliers on the grid, as performance was enhanced by quite a way. But sadly, Firestone would have 3 pretty shocking final years in Formula 1. With Goodyear as their only competitor, they would not win a single race, causing them to drop out of the sport in 1975, meaning that over their 121 starts, they would win 49 races and claim 3 constructors' titles. Goodyear competed in Formula 1 consistently from 1964 all the way until 1998. They would start 494 races, winning a staggering 368 of them, claiming 26 constructors' titles. Holy guacamole. For the 35 years that Goodyear spent in the sport, they would be the most successful tyre manufacturer in 24 of them. This may be due to the fact that they were the sole supplier for 7 out of those championships, but monopolising the market, making high barriers for other manufacturers to enter, only happened because their tyres were so good and everyone wanted them. And it seemed as though Goodyear could not be topped. Well, that was until Bridgestone came along. The Japanese tyre manufacturer initially entered Formula 1 in 1976 and 1977 to little success, but would decide to re-enter in 1997. This first year would be quite difficult, only powering lower teams such as Arrows, Minardi and, you're not going to believe this, MasterCard Lola. Oh my god. But now, data enriched from that first year, Bridgestone would manage to knock Goodyear off of the top step for 1998, thanks to the reintroduction of the grooved tyre rules, so no more slicks for the boys. And Bridgestone absolutely embarrassed Goodyear. They embarrassed Goodyear so unbelievably hard that Goodyear had a complete strop and left the sport at the end of 1998. Ouch, Goodyear, you need something for that burn. Over the 14 years that Bridgestone would compete in the sport, they started 244 races, winning 175 of them, pretty decent, and winning 11 Constructors' Championships. This departing of Goodyear would open up a new era for Bridgestone, where they were able to be the sole supplier of tyres in Formula 1 between 1999 and 2000, and from 2007 to 2010. But between 2000 and 2007, they would have a challenger. Bring up Michelin. Now I know before you say in the comments, oh, it should be Michelin, it's French, I'm British, I'm going to pronounce it Michelin, alright? Michelin initially raced in Formula 1 between 1977 and 1984, competing against Bridgestone's ex-rival Goodyear, where they would be relatively outshone, except for in the final years, where Michelin were able to win 13 of the 15 races in 1981 and 14 out of the 16 races in 1984, mainly thanks to the efforts of Niki Lauda and Alain Prost in the McLarens. But they would return to the sport in 1997 in an attempt to topple the giants of Bridgestone. I mean, Bridgestone had done it before with Goodyear, so what's stopping Michelin? But this wouldn't exactly go to plan. They made a very good effort of it, don't get me wrong. Let's look at 2005, their most successful year, where they would win 18 of the 19 races, with a single race coming for Bridgestone at the US Grand Prix. Now, think about it, US Grand Prix. 2005, I think we all know what's happening. This US Grand Prix was an absolute nightmare for Michelin. Michelin's tyres were deemed unsafe on the Indianapolis banking after multiple drivers had some pretty nasty tyre blowouts. And as Michelin could not seem to work around this tyre problem that they had, all of the Michelin teams decided to pull into the pits at the start of the race on the Sunday, leaving only the Ferraris, the Jordans, and the Minardis to actually complete the race because they were all on Bridgestone tyres. And this complete embarrassment for Michelin definitely soured the relationship they had with many of the teams and was almost certainly a key factor in them leaving the sport at the end of 2006 with a record of 215 race starts, 102 wins and 4 Constructors' Championships. Don't hold your head in shame, Michelin, that's a bloody good record. And finally, we move on to Pirelli, the tyre manufacturer that we're so used to today. Pirelli actually have quite the rocky history in Formula 1. They were there all the way back in 1950 when this all started, dominating every championship from 1950 to 1954, winning 32 of the 41 races held, mainly thanks to, who would have guessed it, it's Juan Manuel Fangio again. Now, they continued supplying tyres until the end of the 1958 season, where they matched AVON on the number of wins achieved. None. Pirelli would wait until 1981 to re-enter the sport, where they would again be quite unsuccessful, not being able to bring the fight to Goodyear in 1985 or 1986, and thus dropping out of the sport again. Only to re-enter in 1989, again trying to challenge Goodyear, which they again failed miserably at, losing 47 of the 48 races held in the 3-year period. And then they dropped out again. And I think Pirelli had basically accepted defeat by then. That was until a deal opened up. It materialized for Pirelli. In 2011, they would re-enter the sport as the sole tyre manufacturer for Formula 1. Now, slicks had become mandatory under Bridgestone in 2009 in an attempt to increase the overtaking, and Pirelli sort of carried on that legacy. Michelin, AVON, and Pirelli all showed interest, but in June 2010, it was announced that Pirelli would be the sole tyre supplier, receiving a 3-year contract that they've managed to continue extending to the present day. The different iterations of tyre under Pirelli has certainly been confusing for the fans at times. Don't even get me started on the Ultra Soft, the Hyper Soft, the Giga Soft, the Mega Soft, the Softy Soft, the Whatty What. But luckily, Pirelli decided to reduce the number of tyre compounds from 7 to 5 for 2019 and made a system so that there would only actually be 3 compounds at each weekend, named under the soft, mediums and hards. But this would mean that a tyre could be the mediums at one weekend weekend, but then could be the softs or the hards at another weekend, which also is quite confusing, so I don't know. But hey, Pirelli have the deal, and we've kind of just got to deal with it. But to be fair to them, we've not had too many tyre scandals or anything like that since they took over the license to do the tyres. I mean, if we just forget Silverstone 2013, then they're looking alright in my eyes. But there we have it. That gives you the evolution of F1 tyre brands from over the years. It actually seems quite poetic that we began with Pirelli dominating, and now we currently have Pirelli dominating. Well, it's not like they have any competition at the moment, but we'll forget that. Speaking of competition, would you like to see F1 open up the space for more tyre manufacturers to join the sport and introduce sort of another aspect to the whole of Formula 1? I'd love to know. Also, which tyre manufacturers would you like to see enter into Formula 1? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Drop a like on this video if you did enjoy, or if you learned something new about Formula 1 tyres, and be sure to subscribe to the channel as well, because I make motorsport content super regularly that you're not going to want to miss. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you meerkats later. Goodbye, guys.